We now begin the introduction to Nahum, a little 3-chapter oracle against the city of Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria. The theme of the book, it predicts the fall of Nineveh, which was fulfilled in 612 BC. This would be about a century after Jonah had gone to Nineveh. And there's going to be a contrast here. Jonah went to Nineveh and preached to it. The city repented in sackcloth and ashes, and God relented of the calamity that he had predicted through Jonah. But now Nahum is going to predict calamity, and this time it's going to happen. The author is Nahum. Nahum was a Elkoshite, which presumably means he's from Elkosh. However, we don't really know where Elkosh was historically. We can date the book between 650 and 630 BC. So if I were to give you one number for the date of Nahum, I might make it 645. The reason that we can know the date is because of Nahum 3, 3 through 8. There it speaks of the fall of thieves, or otherwise called No Aman. Are you better than thieves, situated on the Nile, with the water around her? The river was her defense, the waters her wall. Cush and Egypt were boundless, were her boundless strength. Put in Libya were among her allies, and yet she was taken captive and went into exile. Her infants were dashed to pieces at every street corner. Lots were cast for her nobles. So it speaks of that event, which we know to have been 663 BC. But then it predicts the fall of Nineveh, which takes place in 612 BC. And so it has to be between those dates, and again, around 650 to 630 would seem to be reasonable. Now, the historical setting is that the Assyrians have continued to dominate Judah since 735 under Ahaz, when he submitted to Tiglath-Pileser III and began paying tribute. And so for the next century, Judah was under control of the Assyrians. Israel was deported under Sargon II, starting around 721 to 718. But then Assyria began to go into decline from 626 to 612. So around 626, you have the king of Babylon, Nabopolassar, gained independence from Assyria. And close to that same time, Judah also gained independence under Josiah, or perhaps a couple years earlier, 629, 628-ish. In 616, Nabopolassar begins making inroads into Assyrian territory. By 614, the city of Ashur, which is along the Tigris River north of Babylon, Ashur fell to a combination of Cyaxares, king of the Medes. Actually, it fell to the king of the Medes, Cyaxares. The Babylonians were actually coming to attack Ashur as well, and they arrived too late for the battle. But then they joined forces, and in 612 BC, they continue on north up to Nineveh, and a combination of the Babylonians under Nabopolassar and the Medes under Cyaxares destroy the city of Nineveh, thus fulfilling Nahum's prophecy. They later go on to the west to Haran, where They take that city too, the last major stronghold of the Assyrians. That's going to lead shortly after that to the Battle of Carchemish, where Assyria, what's the very last remnant of the Assyrians fall, and Judah falls into the hands of the Babylonians. But at this point, it's just the fall of Nineveh that's in view. The genre of the book of Nahum is oracle against nations genre, and this one's in particular an oracle against Nineveh. Again, Nineveh averted judgment in the 8th century when they repented at the preaching of Jonah. In the meantime, Assyria has controlled Judah since 734-ish, and Assyrian idolatry had influenced Manasseh, one of the most wicked kings of Judah, from 695 to 642. Very long reign, and very bad reign religiously, because he was very idolatrous. The Assyrians were known for their cruelty. Ashurbanipal has a relief, for example, where he's happily enjoying a party, but the enemy king's head hangs in a tree. Here you have the scene where you have Ashurbanipal and his wife together enjoying a little banquet, but over here you have the head of his enemy hanging in the tree. Here you have a scene of Assyrians torturing their enemies, and here they are executing their enemies. As a matter of fact, most of the Assyrian artwork are scenes of war. They were very warlike people, which is how they built their empire. Again, some of these scenes that we've talked about. Well, the outline of the book, it has an introductory psalm describing God as the divine warrior. It goes on to talk about Nineveh's impending doom. And then it describes in advance the siege of Nineveh. It begins the oracle of Nineveh, the word of the vision of Nahum the Elkoshite. A jealous and avenging God is the Lord. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries, and he reserves wrath for his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger and great in power, and the Lord will by no means leave the guilty unpunished. In a whirlwind and a storm is his way, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up the rivers, and so on and so forth. The Lord is good. I'll skip down to the bottom. A stronghold in the day of trouble. But with an overwhelming flood, he will make a complete end of its sight, and he will pursue his enemies into darkness. Now, perhaps it bothers you when it says that the Lord is a divine warrior. It was actually the Medes and the Babylonians who physically destroyed Nineveh, but according to Nahum, God was working in and through and behind them to accomplish his purposes. It may bother you that he's called a jealous God. But jealousy in this sense is zealous to maintain that which is rightly his. We talked about that in the Ten Commandments. He is zealous to maintain that which is rightly his. Assyria had messed with his people Israel, and that is why that they were condemned. And avenging also sounds troublesome, but it refers in this context, the Hebrew word is Nahum, refers to retributive justice. It's not just malicious, arbitrary acts, but rendering justice to these wicked people who had committed all kinds of atrocities. Think of ISIS in the modern realm, and You would be very close to the kind of things the Assyrians did in about the same geographic region, as it turns out. Nahum 3 describes the bloody scene of how the city would fall. Woe to the bloody city, all full of lies and plunder, no end to the prey, the crack of the whip and the rumble of the wheel, the galloping horse, the bounding chariot, horsemen charging, flashing sword and glittering spear, host of slain, heaps of corpses, dead bodies without end, they stumble over the bodies, and for all the countless whorings of the prostitute, graceful and deadly charms, who betray nations with her whorings and peoples with her charms. And it goes on to describe how Nineveh will be wasted and destroyed the way Thebes had been decades earlier. So what lessons can we derive from a book like Nahum? Well, for one, we can learn something of God's holy judgment of sinners. You might say that God's holy judgment of Nineveh foreshadows his ultimate judgment of all sinners and confining them to hell. It's good and right for wicked people to be properly punished. Ultimately, all will, and God's acting in history to do that from time to time is a reminder of that larger truth. We also see how God works through men in history. God is portrayed as a divine warrior who makes war on Nineveh, and yet he did so through human agents, the Medes and the Babylonians. Some readers of prophecy sometimes takes the language overly literally. God often works indirectly through human agency. We also see how invincible evil foes ultimately fall. Nineveh and the capital of Assyria and the Assyrians had been a very evil, powerful empire for over a century. They seemed unstoppable and unbeatable, but they came to an end. Other great empires have done the same. Back in my day even, I saw the Soviet Union, a large and a very wicked empire that collapsed in my lifetime, when no one thought it was possible for such a powerful kingdom to go down, but it did. And ultimately all evil foes are going to fall, and the kingdom of God and God's will prevail. These are the ruins of Nineveh today. Again, it's near Mosul, one of the cities ISIS took over that at the time that I'm recording this was being besieged by the Iraq army to try to get them out of there. And that will be my introduction to the book of Nahum.